What happens when your own people see you as a traitor, and the empire you served abandons you in the end? In the shadows of the Algerian War of Independence, a forgotten chapter haunts the memory of a nation, the story of the Harkis. These were the Algerian Muslims who sided with France during the brutal 8-year war for liberation. They fought against their fellow Algerians, believing in promises that would never be kept. What followed was betrayal, massacre, and decades of silence. Welcome to Sands of History, where we uncover the hidden truths of the past, the empires that rose and fell, and the people history tried to forget. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support our journey. And if you'd like to help us financially, links are in the description below.
The birth of a complicated identity. To understand the Harkis, we must first understand colonial Algeria. Algeria was invaded by France in 1830 and declared part of France itself by 1848. But while French settlers, or colons, enjoyed full citizenship, native Algerian Muslims were governed under the Code de l'Indigenat, which imposed a racist legal structure and restricted civil rights. Shepard, 2006. By the 1950s, Algerians were deeply disenfranchised. This fueled the emergence of the FLN, Front de Libération Nationale, which launched a guerrilla war against French forces in 1954. This war became one of the bloodiest decolonization conflicts of the 20th century. Evans, 2012. Amid this chaos, a group of Algerian Muslims, later known as the Harkis, chose to fight for France. By 1961, there were approximately 200,000 Harkis and auxiliary forces, House and McMaster, 2006. Motivations varied. Some joined due to poverty, others out of tribal or political grievances against the FLN, and many were forcibly conscripted. A number of Harkis genuinely believed France would never leave Algeria, and hoped their loyalty would be rewarded with protection and rights. Stora, 1991. The Harkis quickly became critical to France's counterinsurgency operations. They operated as guides, translators, scouts, and soldiers. Many were deployed in remote villages to suppress FLN operations. Some units gained a reputation for brutality, deepening their alienation from Algerian communities. Branch, 2001. To the FLN, the Harkis were not just enemies. They were traitors. The FLN declared that collaborators would be punished. And they were. Thousands of Harkis and their families were targeted during the war, tortured, executed, and left as warnings to others. Alistair Horn, A Savage War of Peace, 1977. But to the French military command, the Harkis were often treated as expendable tools. Many were under-equipped, underpaid, and viewed with suspicion. Still, thousands continued to fight, trapped in a war that offered no safe way out. The end of the war and the betrayal of the Harkis. In March 1962, the Evian Accords officially ended the war and granted Algeria its independence. But the peace came with silence on the fate of the Harkis. The FLN considered them enemies of the revolution, and France abandoned them. Despite earlier promises of asylum and protection, the French government under Charles de Gaulle chose not to evacuate most Harkis, fearing that it would antagonize the new Algerian leadership and undermine reconciliation. Shepard, 2006. Military orders were clear. Do not assist the Harkis in leaving. Only a few French officers defied orders, illegally evacuating small groups of Harkis and their families to France. But the vast majority were left behind. What followed was a systematic and brutal purge. Between 60,000 and 150,000 Harkis and their relatives were massacred in the months after independence, some by mobs, others through state-sanctioned reprisals. Evans, 2012. Branch, 2001. Reports detail executions, torture, and disappearances that left entire villages depopulated. France turned a blind eye. Exile in France, humiliation, and isolation. Roughly 42,000 Harkis were eventually brought to France, many illegally or through the efforts of military officers. But instead of being welcomed, they were isolated and shamed. Stora, 1991. They were settled in remote camps, including Rivesaltes, Larzac, and Saint-Maurice-l'Ardoise. Often in former military barracks or forests, far from cities and social services. Conditions were dire. Mud, cold, lack of sanitation, and social exclusion defined daily life. Families lived in cramped conditions behind barbed wire, essentially internment camps. Abderrahman Moumen, 2010. Children born in these camps would spend their entire youth there, growing up French on paper, but rejected by the state. French society viewed the Harkis with suspicion. They were not seen as heroes, but as reminders of colonial defeat and complicity. Racism, exclusion, and economic hardship defined their experience for decades. Generations of silence and pain. For the Harkis and their descendants, silence became a form of survival. Many parents refused to speak about the war, the massacres, or the betrayal they had endured. Their children grew up alienated from both Algerian and French identities. In Algeria, Harki became a slur, synonymous with cowardice and betrayal. In France, it was a stain, a legacy of a war no one wanted to remember. French governments avoided responsibility for decades. It wasn't until 2001 that President Jacques Chirac publicly acknowledged the suffering of the Harkis, saying France had not fulfilled its duty toward them. But recognition came slowly. Only in 2005 did France pass legislation officially recognizing the contribution of the Harkis and offering modest financial compensation. A reckoning at last? In 2021, President Emmanuel Macron took a bold step. In a speech at the Élysée Palace, he said, "To the Harkis and their children, France has a debt. The Republic must recognize the suffering endured and repair the injustice committed." He acknowledged France's betrayal, issued a formal apology, and promised reparations to surviving Harkis and their descendants. This marked a major turning point in official French discourse, a moment of long-delayed reckoning. But for many in the Harki community, the wounds remain open. Financial compensation cannot erase the trauma of abandonment, exile, and decades of humiliation. And in Algeria, the subject remains taboo. Few dare speak about the mass killings of Harkis in 1962. The state narrative still paints them solely as traitors, with no room for complexity, coercion, or context. Conclusion: the legacy of the Harkis. The Harkis were caught in one of the cruelest paradoxes of decolonization. They fought for a colonial power that saw them as disposable, and they were punished by their fellow countrymen for a war not of their own design. Their fate is a powerful reminder of the collateral damage left behind when empires fall. It is also a cautionary tale of how politics, identity, and history can turn ordinary people into symbols of shame, even when they were merely trying to survive. Today, the descendants of the Harkis continue to demand justice, not just with apologies, but with inclusion, respect, and dignity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sands of History. If you'd like to support our work, links for financial support are in the description below. Your help keeps these forgotten stories alive.